Hello and welcome here again live to the World Crypto Network to the next episode in the show Read Rothbard and Use Bitcoin, two things that are very important. And today we're going to combine them really thoroughly because we are going to talk about the newest tech that is going on in Bitcoin, the Lightning Network. But most importantly, how it works economically and if it might introduce some problems to the Bitcoin. So we are joined by the one and only Ansel Lindner from Bitcoin and Markets. How are you doing?
What's up, Max? Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Couldn't think of someone else to have this conversation with. So this is going to be really nice. We are going to start off reading a little bit today, not from a book, but actually from the Wikipedia, the Mises.org Wikipedia article on the interesting topics on money substitutes, because that is basically the main argument that I'm going to propose here today. So, a money substitute consists of a secure and immediately convertible claim to money. A money substitute is not money, but it is used as such. The nature of a money substitute. According to Mises, money substitutes are claims to a definite amount of money, payable and redeemable on demand against a debtor about whose solvency and willingness to pay there does not prevail the slightest doubt, render to the individual all the services money can render, provided that all parties with whom he could possibly transact business are perfectly familiar with these essential qualities of the claims concerned. That is daily maturity, as well as undoubted solvency and willingness to pay on the part of the debtor. We may call such claims money substitutes, as they can fully replace money in an individual or a firm's cash holdings. The technical and legal features of a money substitute do not concern catalectics. A money substitute can be embodied either in a banknote or in a bank deposit with a bank, subject to checkbook money or deposit currency, provided the bank is prepared to exchange the note or the deposit daily free of charge against money proper. Token coins are also money substitutes, provided the owner is in a possession to exchange them at need, free of expense and without delay against money. To achieve this is not required that the government be bound by law to redeem them. What counts is the fact that these tokens can be really converted, free of expense and without delay. If the total amount of token coins issued is kept within reasonable limits, no special provisions on the part of the government are necessary to keep their exchange value at par with their face value. The demand of the public for small change gives everyone the opportunity to exchange them easily against pieces of money. The main thing is that every owner of a money substitute is perfectly certain that it can, at every instant and free of expense, be exchanged against money. So this is just the first paragraph here about the nature of a money substitute. So Ansel, if you would like to join in and just what do you think about this first paragraph in general, and do you agree with this definition of a money substitute?
Well, this is one area of Austrian economics I think is going to need to be talked about a lot because, Mises and mainly Mises, he defined what the Austrian view of money is, and with money substitutes, fiduciary media, all these things, and that's different now with Bitcoin because that is, I think, a lot of the things that he talks about there are obviously from a physical commodity paradigm. And now that we don't have a physical commodity as the best form of money, then those types of definitions will need to be fleshed out more. Like, you know, M1, M2, M3, what do those look like in a Bitcoin world? And I think I kind of have an idea, but we're all exploring this. I think one of the main words there is converted, right? So it's not the money, it has to be converted into the money. You can dig down deeper and say in that little paragraph there is that it has a face value versus like it is its own value, right? Like an ounce of gold is an ounce of gold, a Bitcoin is a Bitcoin, and a Bitcoin on the Lightning Network is still a Bitcoin. There is no like separate face value to those things. But you have to dig down into what the definition of Bitcoin is. I mean, I know this is different than this whole subjective debate of is Bitcoin Cash Bitcoin, or is Bitcoin more Bitcoin, whatever. But because the way I define that is that this is a network, right? And then the unit is the native token of that network. That's kind of how I define that. And, you know, Bcash is definitely not the same network as Bitcoin, even though they try, you know, then they try to take it like, well, your definition of Bitcoin is different than mine, and they take it relativist instead of subjective and stuff. But let's see, what else do I have? Oh, and then to take that definition further, you have to say, well, it's a UTXO. That's what a Bitcoin is.
Yeah, very interesting points that you bring up, Ansel. And I do agree with you that this is a topic that really needs to be discussed further in Austrian economics and in Bitcoin, because it's one and the same thing here, right? And it is really important that we make sure that these quote unquote old theories do apply and can adapt to the quote unquote new technology.
Mm-hmm.
But that might be my next question for you, Ansel. Do you think that can we, make theories that are agnostic to technology? If you read this definition of a money substitute, that it is a claim on a definite amount of money, but not the money itself. Does Mises only speak here for commodity monies, or does he just speak about the concept of money more in general? So is it agnostic to the fundamental technology, or is it only applicable to this one money that he's talking about?
No, I think it is applicable to Bitcoin. Like, for instance, centralized third parties, right? If you hold your money at Coinbase, that to me would be a money substitute. And but with Bitcoin, there's the built-in ability as part of its native properties or inherent properties that you don't have to do that. Where gold, you do, right? Like, you have to put gold into a vault to send to clear all the books cheaply around your economy. But with Bitcoin, you don't have to do that. So yeah, I think it does apply. And I agree with you. We have to make sure that we're being clear about where these ideas are coming from and what we are taking and building on those ideas. I don't think we're necessarily replacing them. I think maybe there's a little bit of over theorizing for the last 40 years, maybe in Austrian economics, and we got to chip away now back down to the core and build Bitcoin off of that core. What do you think about that?
Oh, absolutely perfect. That is something that I really do experience with all the, let's say, old school Austrian professors, is that they are so bitten up onto their gold is the perfect money and nothing else, just gold. It's perfect, and nothing can change that. Yeah, gold is a damn good money. It's by far the best commodity money that we have. It's amazing in pretty much all aspects. But this doesn't mean that gold is the only thing that makes a good money. It just happens to be a good money. But there can be other things that are also good monies. And especially when talking about the digital realm, cyberspace, gold just no longer is a good money. So then, stuff like Bitcoin absolutely can be a good money and therefore useful. So yes, I do agree that we have to not just see this from a gold or Bitcoin point of view, but from a money point of view, from a neutral, fundamental core, fundamental principles that we can apply to anything and everything, regardless. What we are talking about here should not just be limited to gold and Bitcoin. It should be about money in general. And that is, I think, really important. And Ansel, you said then that the question really is, what is Bitcoin? What is this thing actually? And you spoke that it's this network, absolutely, with this native token, yeah. And what you said, or what I would like to add here, is that I do think that the ownership of a Bitcoin, this thing that you can have ownership over, so not the network, but the actual native token, right? This thing called Bitcoin that you can own. You only own this if you hold the private keys, right? So this would mean that the base money here is not Bitcoin per se, but maybe more the ownership over that private key. And if you do own this private key, then you do own the electronic peer-to-peer cash system, the base money. So maybe Ansel, to elaborate a little bit on that, more on how can we define this base money in Bitcoin? Because only if we can define this, then we can move on to the second layer.
Yeah, I don't know. I think my thoughts there when you were talking is, gold is an element, and that element has properties, and those are immutable properties, right? Because it's physics and chemistry. Bitcoin is a network that has properties, so there are. That's why it's so important for the network to be immutable, for the rules of the network to be immutable, because those properties must be immutable. Gold would not be a very good money if alchemy existed and we could change anything into gold or gold into anything. There would be no scarcity. There would be no reason to, hold gold. But same thing goes with Bitcoin. Those properties must be immutable, else it loses any sort of scarcity in my mind.
Oh, absolutely. And this is what I think the user-activated soft fork, just to go on a little bit of a tangent, really proved. And especially, the defense of the Bitcoin Cash hard fork, that you cannot change this protocol. It's almost impossible, right? And if you want to change it, it has to be done with overwhelming majority and overwhelming consensus, which in a true decentralized system is almost impossible to reach. So the unchangeability of Bitcoin per se is, in my opinion, one of the many big strengths in Bitcoin. And maybe then to continue that thought is, if we have this unchangeability, this also means that if we would break some of those aspects of Bitcoin, that this would create a new thing, right? If we break the rules, we no longer have the original thing, right? We have something else. And so if we would break the fundamental consensus rules in a hard fork style, in a backwards incompatible way, or a downwards incompatible way, we would then have a money substitute compared to the thing that is in consensus, which would be the true money, the cash money. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, exactly. You just rephrased the entire last 2 years of Bitcoin, really, because that's what we've been fighting over for a long time. And it's not that Bitcoin can't be hard forked, right? But my opinion, this is obviously opinion, Bitcoin can't be hard forked unless it's an existential threat. And that what that builds in is that the old chain will die for sure. If the old chain dies, it must hard fork, right? Because you can't ever have a competing original chain, because it has a built-in bug that's going to make it stop functioning. Kind of like this bug that's coming up with the date. I guess it's a date bug that we hit like in 2038. And it just, the way the Julian dates, or the way the dates work in the program, that it'll seize up the actual software will seize up. So we'll need to somehow hard fork before then. But if you stay on that original chain, you can't continue. So that is an existential hard fork. I think that's possible, and that kind of opens up the door for other things, like what happens if at that moment 2 forks arrive at the same time. How do you distinguish which one's the real Bitcoin? But that gets into a little bit more philosophical argument, I think. Like, say one fork at that time changed the block size and another fork didn't change the block size. All they changed was the date. They both changed the date, but one changed the block size. Which one would be Bitcoin at that point? And that's a longer discussion. But I did have a point about, I wanted to jump back to kind of the thing we were talking about on Twitter, is the Lightning Network, and are the Lightning Bitcoins really Bitcoins? So I started building this tree up. You have the element of gold, and then that gives rise to properties, and then those properties give the money characteristics. That when that element is applied to the use of money, it has certain characteristics, and those characteristics can get they're limited, right? Like we live in a scarce world, so you can't have absolutely perfect money. Just like Bitcoin isn't perfect, we had to build Lightning Network, right? So you have these limited characteristics, but you can add more abilities or more properties, but they can only be additive. They can't affect the past. So that's how I kind of see Lightning is adding without subtracting. And that's what you said there a second ago with downwards compatibility, that every layer must be not only, well, it has to be compatible downward. That's what I think.
Yes, really, really interesting. Because that's exactly what the big question, right? Is there a fundamental economic difference if you have your normal cold storage Bitcoin that is on chain, nestled with the current state directly in the blockchain with accumulated proof of work on top, which makes it immutable and unchangeable, right? That is the aspect of a UTXO that is buried within the Bitcoin blockchain. This is always the current state, right? This is the UTXO. This is how much Bitcoin are in that UTXO, period. No questions. That is how it is. It's unchangeable. It's unbreakable. Compared to a Lightning Network, where yes, you do have the opening transaction of this payment channel. This one has a specific amount of Bitcoin in there, and it is nestled within the blockchain, right, with accumulated proof of work on top of it. And we can prove that this is the Bitcoin with this, in this UTXO with this private key securing it. Yeah. But what we cannot say is the current state of that UTXO. Is Alice still controlling the full Bitcoin, or did she send 0.6 Bitcoin already to Bob over the Lightning Network? Did she already update her state and put her new signature on top? We do not know this. So this is a different attribute of this UTXO in the Bitcoin blockchain, because we only know that it is a Lightning channel, but we do not know who has the ownership over the current state in this Lightning channel. So do you think that there's an issue here?
Yeah, I get what you're saying now. I didn't get it on Twitter, actually. Yeah, so I think here's another question then, like unconfirmed transactions. Are those Bitcoins unconfirmed, or are those Bitcoins really Bitcoin until they're confirmed into the blockchain? Or even that, like, let's say you could get down to the millisecond and say, hey, that transaction is in flight. Is that actually credit? Like, I don't know. But I think that it's connected to the cryptography. As long as it's cryptographically owned, then it doesn't necessarily need, because it can't be otherwise, right? Like once you sign, like if you're in a payment channel or in a Lightning channel and you sign it, that other person and the other person signs it, so it's a valid swap or valid payment. they can't reverse that, right? Because then you can publish the state and you can get your money. So I think the cryptographic settlement happens instantly. And so then it wouldn't be any sort of different type of Bitcoin. It's pure Bitcoin at that point. What do you think?
Yeah, well, the unconfirmed transactions are another great thing to talk about, right? Because, well, as soon as you put the signature on the transaction, everyone knows that you have given over the ownership over those Bitcoin, right? You have signed with your own keys this transaction, which according to the consensus rules means that now the new or those outputs are now going to be the new owners of those Bitcoin, right? And we know that you have voluntarily given up the ownership rights, right? This is what we can tell because of cryptography, which happens instantly, right? As soon as you hit the elliptic curve signing algorithm, bam, bam, like that's it. You have irreversibly given up that ownership. However, what we do not know is if the transaction is, number one, correct, and so the entire setup of the transaction, and of course, more importantly, our new is money double spent? Our new Bitcoin being created? And so we know that the transaction is partially correct. We know that the signature is correct, right? But we do not know if the entire setup is correct, if everyone is going to accept this, and if they're being double spent. We do only know that if it is nestled within the blockchain and only with enough accumulated proof of work, right? So even one confirmation might not be enough proof of work in order to secure that it's not being double spent. So you might say that the true finality is never reached in this system. It's more a probabilistic finality. I do not think that this matters too much in the context of it being a money or the true money or a money substitute. I just think that the final settlement, the true final settlement of the ownership title to that Bitcoin, it does take a specific amount of time, regardless over which medium you send it. But as you said, theoretically, you could sign the Bitcoin transaction from hand, write it on a piece of paper, roll it up, put it on the leg of a carrier pigeon, and throw it up in the air, and wait until someone is going to pick it up and put it on his full node, right? You still have signed the transaction really, really early, but propagating this signed transaction to the network took a while. Then mining this transaction into the Kented block took a while until it eventually gets confirmed, not just by one block, but by several accumulated proofs. So I do think that the time element is involved here and that it is important to realize it.
Yeah. Getting back to the actual definition, can you pull up that page again? What was the very first sentence about claims? Immediately convertible claim to money. Well, to me, that this is getting really in the weeds here, but like being convertible, that kind of means there has to be some sort of human interaction or human action in that case. And Bitcoin doesn't necessarily need human involvement or humans to convert anything, right? I mean, do you see what I'm getting at there?
Well, I don't think that it requires human action, but I do think that it does require action in general from someone, from something. It can be automated. You can have a vending machine that turns your gold coin into money paper certificates. So this does not have to be human, but some action has to happen. It is not, let's say, it just doesn't happen without any cause. Like something has to cause this transformation from the money base, from the cash money to the money substitute.
Right, but if it's automatic and like cryptographically secure, right? Like then there would be no difference between one and the other. Like you wouldn't need to convert it. because it's the same thing. It's actually like mathematically the same thing, kind of. They're both. Does that make any sense?
Well, yeah, it does, right? Because if we have 100% certainty that what we have here is the immediate is the money, right? Then this might affect it. But it also says here that it is the secure convertible claim to money. So in this definition that Mises provides here, we already have the security in mind. And if you take this to the digital cryptographic level, right, Mises is saying here, as long as a money substitute consists of a cryptographically proven and immediately convertible claim to money, which you might even say that Lightning, because it might be a bit time delayed, right? It is not specifically that, but absolutely it is it is cryptographically provable, right?
Yeah, I was just I mean, my example on Twitter was like a gold bar versus a gold coin. I think like maybe that gold coin has separate attributes, right? Or additions to the properties of the gold bar, and that gold bar has additional properties to rough gold mined out of the ground. So each step along the way, you still have gold, just like you still have Bitcoin from a Genesis Coinbase or from a Coinbase transaction to being tumbled around for 5 years, then to being in Lightning. I think it's always the same Bitcoin. It's just in an additive state. So they honed it to give it different properties. And I don't know. I was trying to go through that definition word by word and be like, look, this applies to old school physical commodity and not to digital commodity, but I failed, I think.
No, you did not. I really do think that this is a great example, that it fundamentally, it is the same thing. It doesn't matter if your gold atoms are in the form of a coin or a bar. It is the same thing, right? It is gold, period. It's the atoms in this thing are gold. And yes, it is in a different form, and that gives it different attributes, and that gives it different values, right? Because you can use it for different things. A gold that is in the form of a tooth can be, used much more specifically than gold that is in a bar, right? It's in this aspect of the usability completely different, but the gold atoms itself are fundamentally the same thing. And this might perfectly apply to Bitcoin, because if you have full ownership over your private key, then you do have true Bitcoin. And how you express the transaction of this ownership, either it being a full node, that you run a full node and propagate the transaction directly, if you have a SPV wallet on your phone and transact it over another full node, if you route it over a satellite, if you route it over a carrier pigeon, if you route it over an open dime, doesn't even have to be confirmed on chain here, right? Or if you route it over Lightning, it doesn't matter, because it's just a different form, a different let's say a different essence of the same Bitcoin. But nevertheless, it is Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's my opinion. Exactly. I so you I don't know where to go with that. Now you were talking about kind of defining a centralized layer 2. Should we talk about that aspect of it, or no? Or did we cover it?
Well, yeah, that is interesting. Would it make a difference if in this Lightning Network you issue more Bitcoin than the 21 million? So you issue new Bitcoin with each Lightning channel that you open. Does this change our argument here?
Yeah, they can't do that as far as I know, because that's why you have to get it on chain to open up. I wrote that tweet or that thought down here a minute ago. Was you said you're talking about double spending, and I said Lightning can't be double spent into the Lightning Network, because it has to be confirmed on chain, and that confirmation on chain is what guards against double spending, right?
Yes, it might, but it might also be just the So absolutely, this is going to be the final, the final arbitrary will be the Bitcoin blockchain to prove the double spendiness. But the double spendiness, is that even a word? I don't know. Well, but what also might help here is the automatic balancing of each payment channel, right? Because you can only, so if Alice and Bob has a channel and Bob and Charlie have a channel, if the channel of Alice and Bob is 5 and 10, and then and Bob to Charlie is let's say 2 to 5. I don't know. Now, if Alice sends 1 Bitcoin, she will first route it through Bob, who will of course check if at the current state Alice still has the 1 Bitcoin at her disposal. If yes, then he will accept it. And then he will route the payment to Charlie, and he will first check if Bob has enough on his payment channel with Bob and Charlie to route it. So each individual will check for the double spending as well. Because let's say if Alice only has a channel capacity of 3 Bitcoin, but she is sending 5 Bitcoin, then Bob will not accept that route, because Bob knows the current state, and he knows that Alice does not have enough funds locked in this channel to do this transaction. So in the first step, the individual routing participants will check for double spend, and if they disagree, then they will have to settle it on the main blockchain.
Yeah, and not only those two parties are involved either, because you broadcast, your node broadcasts your balance and your channels and all that after every update. So everybody that you're connected to is going to hear it as well. And so there is that double check. Yeah, I didn't know that either until like last week. And yeah, when they get an update, a channel update, they broadcast the message. There's like 4 different messages that are broadcast by everybody all around the Lightning Network. So it's actually a very noisy place.
So everyone, regardless if I have a direct connection to them, is going to know the current state of my channel?
Well, that's how your node will know the rest of the network, right? Because that node that's 7 hops away from you, they actually broadcast that. And so your node can set up its own web that it has and see all the connections within its web. And then when it updates a channel, then your node actually receives that message because it's broadcast on the Lightning Network, and your node will update its own state. So each node has like its own individual state that it can see.
So you still basically have the mempool in Lightning, just that it's no longer the UTXOs, but the current set of each Lightning channel. But then we have the same issues that we have with the mempool. We only know how to order all those noisy transactions according to the correct time frame, because we have the Bitcoin blockchain, right?
Yeah, there's checks in there, especially with new balances and things like that. Like if you plus up your balance, say, then there's timestamps in all of those messages for everybody to be synced up. But yeah, there is like, it's not 100% certain that somebody won't try to double spend on you in the Lightning Network, but it's actually much, much less likely than on chain, right? You have 10 minutes or say 5 minutes to double spend on chain, but you only have like a millisecond or a nanosecond to double spend on the Lightning Network.
Oh yeah, that is very true. You just don't have time to double spend on the Lightning Network. Interesting. Okay, yeah, that is also a nice fact. But then just to bring it back on the issue, if the Lightning Network is or might be a money substitute, a second layer thing, does it matter if new Bitcoins are being created? And here I would say yes, absolutely. Because if new Bitcoin would be created, regardless of how the current state is, just a hypothetical construct here, then this would break downwards compatibility, right? So the second layer would fundamentally break the consensus rules of the first layer. In this example, in Lightning Network, there would be 42 million Bitcoin, But on the Bitcoin base layer, the consensus rule says clearly only 21 million Bitcoin. So this would be a fundamental break in the consensus rules towards the downside, right? But how far does this go? Because we are breaking the Bitcoin consensus rules in the Lightning Network already, because it's just a different protocol, right? So just some consensus rules on propagation, on of course mining, is all being quote unquote ignored in the second layer of Lightning Network. So which consensus rules do have to be applied with, and which can be broken?
Opening, closing transactions, that where you actually interact with layer one, that has to be compliant. But you can see how it gets very complicated very quickly, even on layer two, because think about, not only is it Bitcoin, right? You have Litecoin that can be on the Lightning Network as well, right? You have all of these other coins that are going to be on there, not to mention tokens like Giacomo's RGB protocol for tokens on Lightning Network. So you're going to, I mean, it's exponentially more complicated. And that's one reason why it's awesome that we have this sound layer one. Like the more you learn about layer two and how extremely explosive and expansive it is, then you're like, wow, there's no way we could have fit that on layer one. That was just retarded. So
Oh yeah, that is so true. Is that scaling such a digital technological network is pretty much impossible to do all on one layer, right? It has to be put on several layers, kind of like in a pyramid scheme, so that the information can travel efficiently. But that might also be one of my concerns about this thing, because yes, the internet scales perfectly well in a pyramid scheme, but guess what? Money does not. A pyramid scheme in money is dangerous, really, really, really dangerous, because it splits into different departments, and it provides the opportunity of creating or increasing the money supply, right, through fractional reserve and all that kind of stuff.
can you explain how the internet's pyramid scheme?
Well, it is on several layers, right? So we have what is the first layer called? It's not TCP/IP. That's the layer above. I'm really not a technological guy here, but so do you know the first information layer on the internet?
Well, I think it's like Ethernet, and then it's
Right.
TCP/IP right above that.
Exactly right. So it did scale in several layers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that this is quite good for a technological network.
Oh, so you're saying that it's a stack, it's a protocol stack, that doesn't work for money because they're, it's like a cake layer.
Exactly right. It's in the internet technology or network technology, you scale on several layers. That
Right.
makes sense, right, from a technological point of view.
Yeah.
But I would argue that it does not make sense in a money, because you always create the single points of failure at the pegs between the layers, right? So if you have gold, works perfectly fine, right? It's a good first base layer. If you put it into a second layer, which would be the money substitute in the bank vault, you introduce the possibility of the central point of failure, to that someone kicks down and steals all the gold, right? Then on a third layer, you would have, for example, fractional reserve, so that you can increase the money supply because you lend out more money that you actually have. And then you might argue even further that you have stuff like cash, sorry, not cash, but check money, and debit card money and credit card money, that this further is a new level that will further increase the money supply. Then you have derivatives on top of that, which is the next level and further makes it more complicated. And it basically is the same thing, right? It is a stack, a pyramid scheme, basically, but it always increases the fragility of the money system. And this means that number one, is less economically sound because it increases the money supply, right? Starts the boom and bust cycle. But then this this fragility also brings, as Nassim Taleb says, the extreme danger of black swan events. That if you have one thing that it has a really low chance of happening, but a huge devastating effect if it does happens, this always brings down a pyramid scheme, a stack-based scheme, much more than a flat layer one solution.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that, well, for starters, layers like this, like you described for the traditional fiat system, they can work for a while, but like you said also that they eventually will have a black swan or some tail end event that will knock it all down to dust, or they'll have to print more, or they'll have to double down on their pyramiding. But I think what Bitcoin has, and that's totally possible with Bitcoin. It is at this point, I think, far down the future. And like I was saying, that layer 2 is so much more complex than layer 1, or that it's going to be so much more complex. That you can see how like that communication between layers can get fuzzy, right? Maybe far down in the future that will happen, but for the near term, at least the foreseeable future, I don't think that's possible. And it's also based on cryptography, right? So we have the connection between layers are unforgeable. So that is very, very important to keep this pyramid or to keep the stack upright and not fall over. And lastly, I'll say that this is a very good reason to have a public ledger on the base layer. So we have all of this stuff about Zcash and Monero and how it's so great. We need fungibility on the base layer. That is supposed to be really important. But if you look decade or 2 or 3 down the road, when layer 2 is just like this crazy web of complexity, and then maybe layer 3 is even crazier on top of that, who knows, right? Like then it's going to be very important for that initial root system of layer 1 to be publicly verifiable and the balances to be known, because then you have the cryptography throughout the stack, but you have to have at least one place that's visible and public.
Oh, absolutely. 2 fantastic points you bring up, Ansel. And one I would like to touch on first is that, as Nick Bastiat says in his great articles on Medium, and he has a couple interviews here in the WCN as well. Fortunately, he couldn't join this time, but maybe next show. He talks about that with Lightning Network, due to the cryptographic technologies that are being used and the Bitcoin base layer, right, and all the game theory and incentives that are going on here, we might for the first time have created something somewhat of a debt, right, that creates interest if you lock up funds for a specific time, but it does this without any counterparty risk, right? And that might be mind-blowing. Because honestly, that would be the first time that we have something that behaves like a debt, like something that you issue over time, and that earns you interest based on the amount that you've issued, but without the counterparty risk of someone stealing your money or not repaying it, because you still retain full ownership, full control over your private key, and if you do not sign a new state, well, then you're not going to lose any money, right? So this is really interesting because this might give us something that is perfectly close to the natural and pure rate of interest, which is the perfect reflection of the time value, right? Of the time preference of all the users in the economy, all the money users, all the people that exchange their goods and services for that money. And of course, that have preferences of whether they want their money now or later. And with Lightning Network, we might actually come to this true natural rate of interest. So really interesting point that you bring up here, Ansel. Would you like to elaborate on it?
Oh, well, I was just, yeah, I like Nick. He's been a listener to the show, and I've talked to him many times on chats and stuff. And yeah, he is doing awesome work. That's groundbreaking. It's like a connection, you know. It's a discovery. I don't think it's an invention, right? Bitcoin wasn't an invention either. Bitcoin was a discovery. And yeah, Nick has made a fundamental discovery there, I think. But it's going to take a while to flesh all of that out. I want to ask you a question, kind of turn about this whole discussion here. Is now is Lightning the money? Could Lightning be the money substitute, or maybe base layer be the money substitute? How do we know the difference?
Anyway. That is a good question, because I think it depends, right? It depends on what the people use as their everyday money, right? If they would use only Lightning Network, but no longer Bitcoin at all. So because theoretically, right, you don't have to close a payment channel. You can leave it open forever. And if you never come back, and if nobody ever comes back, we might have empty Bitcoin blocks for a long time, and everyone is using Lightning. Then I would say that in that instance, yes, Lightning is the new base money. But as long as there's still the channels being closed, as long as there is still activity happening on the first layer on the Bitcoin blockchain, then I do think that because of the inherent attributes of the Lightning Network, the Bitcoin on-chain will always be the base layer.
Yeah, that's true, actually, because the work has to come from the base layer. That would be the difference, probably. But I was just thinking of that because, you know, with Nick's stuff, it's like a lot of Bitcoin is going to be on Lightning Network. Maybe all of it. Almost all of it, at least. Like 90% of Bitcoin is going to end up on a layer 2. And there's not going to be much need to transact on layer 1, if Nick is correct.
Yeah, right. If Lightning works, then if you can have truly instant payments without any settlement time, and without any transaction fees, if you have either a good route or a direct payment channel, why would you ever switch again? Yes, you do get the additional accumulated proof of work on your transaction, right? It makes it even more immutable. You're even more certain that you're not being double spent after a while, right? If you discount the time. So yes, there might be a scenario where most of the transactions are happening on Lightning. But because as D10011112 says in the chat, is that empty blocks will never happen. And that, I think, is true, because there will always be some demand for this immutable database called the Bitcoin blockchain, right? It's this fabulous thing, and people, even if they put pictures of cats up there, doesn't matter, someone will do it. And because I do think that this is just given, that there will never be the full switch onto the Bitcoin Lightning Network.
Yeah, and I'm just kind of talking out my butt here, because this is, I mean, I am fully immersed in this space, like you are fully immersed in this space, but all this stuff is so new. And I was thinking as you're talking there that, yeah, of course, we have to onboard people to the Lightning Network. So there has to be on-chain transactions just simply to onboard people. Like, you know, 5-year-olds that get their first Lightning wallet, they're going to need to be onboarded onto the Lightning Network, or, you know, so that the process of people dying and people being born and coming on. I mean, there's so many people. If you just had one transaction for every death and every birth, I mean, that would fill up all the blocks right there. I don't know.
Exactly. Yes. But Ansel, maybe a question for you is that, is it possible to give a Lightning Bitcoin, if we can call it that, to send a Bitcoin over Lightning Network to someone who has not yet opened a channel with anyone? So can we open a channel not from the on-chain side, but actually from the Lightning side? So that if Alice has a channel with Bob, and Charlie does not have a channel with Bob yet, that then Bob can create a channel with the payment that is coming from Alice.
Oh, I'm sure that's possible. I don't know the technicals of it, but I know that like a Bit Refill was just advertising their new thing where you pay them on chain and they open up a channel with you on the Lightning Network as a change. So because you are getting that output anyway, right? You're getting that, you would get that output on chain. You might as well get that output as a Lightning channel, and that opens up further channels for the future.
Oh God, I hate this space because it literally hurts my brain.
Yeah, it does.
It's too many mind blows.
Yeah, it's very important just to have like you need to have some fundamental principles, and that's one thing that we're talking about here. We're trying to, tease out from the, find that needle in the haystack, that one fundamental principle that you can apply to all of the noise that kind of helps you, almost like, when you have what is it, like oil on a bowl of water and there's oil on the top, just a thin little layer, but you have a dot of dish soap on your finger and you touch the top of that water and all the noise goes to the side like that. That's kind of what I feel like these conversations, especially your channel. And I try to do that on my channel and with my Patreon stuff, try to find something to base reality on because it's so crazy.
Right, isn't it? It's insane how fast this is moving and how immense the innovation is. If let alone Bitcoin is only 9.5 years old. So the amount of stuff that we've already done is mind blowing. The amount of innovation that happened in that time period is unprecedented. But now let's continue just thinking about how this might end up with Lightning Network, with a possible third layer, with a possible fourth layer. And we haven't even finished discussing Lightning. We haven't even finished discussing Bitcoin for that. We don't even know what Bitcoin is. We really have no idea about anything because it is so changing so rapidly.
Well, when did Mises write Socialism, right? He wrote that in the teens, like 1917 or something?
1963, I think.
His book Socialism?
Well, he wrote Theory of Money and Credit in 1912, which,
Okay.
by the way, substitute the word gold for the word Bitcoin, and you have the perfect explanation for why Bitcoin is important. So that is insane.
Okay, well, I was just thinking of the socialism one because, Karl Marx was writing in what, 1850, I think. And so then it took 100 years then for like the definitive debunking from Mises and Hayek. So we don't even know, like Bitcoin is so new that it's going to take probably 100 years to really fully know what we're dealing with here.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We say all the time that nobody knows Bitcoin. Nobody really understands Bitcoin. We might have glimpses of it, but truly understand what this is, no chance. And although this is super interesting and super fun to fall down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, right? Because there's just so much to learn and it's endless. This also does create a lot of risk, right? Because if nobody truly understands what is going on, then we might really have a problem that, for example, stuff like the Lightning Network, which might sound technically really viable and technically is a really good solution, turns out to be economically a disaster. So conversations like this, like we had right now, Ansel, are really important. To make sure that we, try to understand what is going on around us and try to make sure that what we are doing is working and economic.
Yeah, you cut out there at the very end. I missed the last few words there, but yeah, the economics is totally important because that's one reason why we know these altcoins won't work, because their economics are all screwed up, right? And I talked about this probably 2 years ago. I wrote about this, the bootstrapping problem for these altcoins, that now that we're in a post-Bitcoin world, there's no way for them to launch, at least economically or viably or whatever, because they're in this world where people know about these basics of Bitcoin. And so they will ruin that currency, or they'll ruin that network in a heartbeat. And there's no way or there's no reason why people would hold like an experimental coin over Bitcoin, right? Like I don't, that's one of the things about Ethereum. They say, oh, Ethereum isn't a store value. It's not meant to be a store value. Well, then why would anyone hold the coin instead of Bitcoin? Because Bitcoin is meant to do that, and it does it much better. So anyway, I just want to throw that in there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So Ansel, I really want to thank you for this really enlightening conversation. Although I might sue you for damages because of all the brain damage, of all the mind blows. So it's always a pleasure talking to you and advancing this theory, advancing this knowledge, which is super important. So I'm looking forward to future discussions, because absolutely we have not solved the problem. We've not solved the issue. We've just opened up a can of worms, and we got lots and lots and lots to discuss. So Ansel, thank you very much again. And your last words, and where can the people find you?
Yeah, thanks, Max. It was fun. There's not very many of us out there that like to talk about this stuff. So yeah, I do my show, Bitcoin and Markets, and you can find that at bitcoinandmarkets.com, all spelled out, no and symbol or anything. And you can follow me on Twitter at Ansel Lindner. And that's it. Check me out.
Oh yeah, and I always say that the price is the most boring thing in Bitcoin, and your fundamental analysis show is, again, like the best show that I always listen to regarding price, because it actually, is not just the voodoo bullshit, but it actually looks at all the fundamentals, or what we have, what we can say about that. So definitely, that is amazing, guys. Please check it out. I just listened to your last episode, which was fantastic, before we joined this show. So that was fun. Guys, you can find me on Twitter at HillebrandMax. You can find my personal website at towardsliberty.com, especially if you want to support the writing of my bachelor thesis on anarchy and money. Please do that. And if you want to support the World Crypto Network, Bitcoin donation address in the link description below. And if you do want to support me on my quest of getting the new and amazing Purism laptop, which we have right here at purei.sm. Here, oh, look at this. Look at this. It's the Libre 15. Amazing, amazing laptop. Open source software and hardware. If you want to support my cause there, it will cost me roughly 0.3 Bitcoin. Probably a little less. I might get a good microphone from that as well. Here we have with Tallycoin, the amazing, amazing transaction, or the fundraising website, which I really love. And we have here from the nice link, ifgi.cc, the possibility of now linking your Bitcoin address with your Twitter profile, so that if you click this on a mobile phone, it will automatically import the address into the Bitcoin wallet, so that you only have to put in the Satoshi amount that you want to send and press send. So super easy. And it also has the feature that if you open it in a browser like this, it automatically jumps to the Tallyco, which is fantastic. So we have here the combination of two really, really cool websites or services. First is Tallycoin, and the other JFIG, which is fantastic. So check out those two projects.
Are those made by the same guy?
No, but they are both made by WCN listeners and longtime fans. So that is amazing to see the community come together and work on those. But two amazing projects, right? Okay.
Definitely. Yeah, I saw that on one of your guys' last shows, and I thought that Tallycoin was a pretty cool idea.
Right, it is. We just need a nice view to show the people, the progress and of the donation drive, which is cool. I really like it, and of course, open source. So check it out, support it. Made by DJ Booth. So I think it's on GitHub somewhere. You'll find it. So thank you again for joining us. This was a fascinating discussion on the question if Lightning is just a Bitcoin substitute or if it is the real thing. We don't know. We think it might be the real thing, but there are good arguments that it actually is a substitute. So let's see how this conversation is going to continue on the next shows. So I thank you very much for joining us today. And Ansel, hopefully see you on one of the next shows. Bye-bye.